Welcome to the Everyday Defender podcast. I'm your co-host, Chris Goosen, and I'm joined by my co-goose, Koos.
Hey, Chris, how are you doing?
Doing great. Hey, I figured co-pilot is everywhere, right? So you may as well have a co-goose if you're going to be doing a podcast.
Then it's 3 geese and a podcast, right?
That's right. In today's episode, we're very, very excited today to be talking about MFA. I had some thoughts about MFA. I've been working sort of with customers in that MFA space for a while now, but recently I kind of rethought, went through this process of just reflecting a little bit on the state of MFA. And I thought it'd be good for us to share, for me to share that with you. We'll talk about MFA and some guidance around there. And then, Koos, you had some Passkeys news and things you wanted to talk about, right?
Yeah, I recently dabbled into Passkeys, FIDO2 enrollment. So I ran into a couple of challenges there I wanted to share.
Excellent. I'm sure that there's going to be some really, really valuable information there. So what else have you been doing the last couple of weeks?
Well, I was actually involved in a rather large security breach at one of the customers, so that was kind of tough.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they weren't finished with putting everything in Microsoft Security Stack just yet. And well, what a coincidence that they just targeted and entered some kind of VPN tunnel with a too easy to guess password. You know how it goes. But it was very unfortunate for them. So I was kind of busy with that one, to be honest.
Yeah, wow. It's always unfortunate when these things happen, because for one, like for guys like us who are kind of helping respond to these things, it's really valuable information, right? Often. So yeah. There's a level of real interest there, but it also is devastating for the customer, right? And for the environment that you're working in. So I can definitely understand that. That's
yeah, and it's also a bit like, though I told you years ago to stop doing that, why are you still? But
yes,
we all know how it goes. But essentially, bottom line, we learn from it, the company learns from it, and I hope I can share some details later so that others can also learn from their mistakes.
That's awesome, fantastic. Well, while you were doing that, I've been on holiday or vacation, I guess, for our American listeners. So I haven't been doing a whole bunch of anything. So it's been, well, I say that, but I haven't been doing a whole lot of IT tech work, right? I live on a farm, so there's kind of always something to be done around here. We've got some alpacas down in the paddock. Nice. So there's always some sort of animal related stuff, but other than that, I haven't really been doing too much.
But you were able to wind down doing that, right?
It's been good, but I think it's gonna, things start kind of getting crazy again towards the end of the year, and it was good. It was a good unwind. I think we all need to take some time for our mental health and all of that every now and then, just to unwind.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that you succeeded on
that. So into it, I guess. Let's get into MFA. And so, one of the things I was thinking about this a little while back. I think we've all been talking about MFA and telling customers, telling anyone who will listen that enable MFA on everything, right? I think that's kind of been the message now for probably a decade. We've been saying that, right? Sadly, though, I still see organizations, that don't have any MFA, right? Nothing, not just pockets, but zero. And almost always the excuse is that there's a particular business case or a particular use case that it prevents them from deploying MFA. So they pause the whole project for everyone because they're trying to solve, for a very, very small group of people. Right? And I feel like that's a real problem. So one of the things I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit was, MFA, is it still relevant for us today? Do we really care? Is it an unachievable sort of utopia that we will never get to? And I think, for me, definitely, I think that we definitely still care about MFA. MFA is more relevant now than it's ever been before, right? And I know we have all these kind of shiny new things like Passkeys, which we'll get to a little later. But I think MFA is still really, really critical for a lot of environments, all environments, really. And I don't think it's an unachievable utopia. I think that there are some things that can be done in every environment that can help secure that environment. So I really wanted to kind of break into this a little bit. And, like I said, I think instead of saying, go out and configure MFA, what I wanted to do today was talk a little bit about, here's how you can go out and configure MFA. Here are some things you can do to look at that MFA deployment. Yeah. So if we start with where should we be right now? Like, what is our baseline, or at least where should everyone be, right? And I think, depending on who you ask, you may get some different opinions here. Personally, I think that you should be in a place where you have MFA for everyone. It doesn't matter whether they're an information worker, end user, or admin, privileged user. Everyone in the environment should have some form of MFA. I don't really mind what it is, right? I mean, obviously, we know that certain MFA factors are better than others, right? SMS, weak, fish resistant, FIDO2, very strong, and everything in between. It doesn't really matter as long as you're at that place where you have MFA for everyone. I think you're in a fairly good place. But as with everything, I think there's a lesson here that your MFA deployment is not set and forget. It's not something you're going to just set up, walk away from, and that's the end of it, right? Attacker habits, all of these sort of the tactics and techniques continue to change. So we need to continue to evolve and mature our the way that we deploy these things. And so what I wanted to talk about here is how we do that practically within our environment, right? Personally, I think that there's the way that you want to be deploying these things and deploying MFA is with conditional access. Now, to do that, you need at least an Entra ID P1 license in your M365 environment or in your Entra environment. I understand that not everyone has that, but if you have a small business license with M365 Small Business Premium, you'll have that too. If you don't have P1 at all, I would strongly urge you to think about that, because conditional access is a very, very important tool in your security arsenal, right? It doesn't matter if it's just for MFA, but there are a lot of other things you can do with it with conditional access that I think it makes a lot of sense for you to be considering that and planning towards that in your next true up. But let's assume you have at least Entra ID P1. What you want to be doing here is, I think you need at least 2 policies for your MFA deployment. Why 2? Well, I'm going to tell you. The first policy that you need is one that applies MFA to all users across the org. So you're actually going to scope that to your cloud apps, and you're going to apply it to the all users setting, right, in the environment. That's pretty simple one, pretty self-explanatory. But the second one, and I think this is the one that a lot of organizations kind of miss, is you want one that applies to your admin roles as well. So you want a conditional access policy that applies and is scoped to the admin role itself, not a group that contains the admins, not the individual users who are admins, but to the role itself. That way, anything that assumes the role of an administrator, global admin, or any of the, I don't know, there's like 100 admin roles, right? Any one of those roles within the tenant will then be forced for MFA. And one of the reasons why we want to do this as a separate policy is that you can then start maturing that, and you can start hardening that. So what you could do is, while the rest of the organization is maybe using the Authenticator app for their MFA, you can start looking at the administrators and saying, hey, we think that we want to do some phishing resistant MFA here, right? And I'll talk about a phish resistant MFA in just a second, but you can then apply that phish resistant MFA only to your admin roles. And already then what you've done is you've taken that next step to hardening the environment just a little bit more, and you've taken that sort of the next level of maturity. So, 2 policies, one for all your users, one for your admin roles. And if you can, start looking at how you implement phish resistant MFA for those admin roles, right? And by that, we mean you want something that is FIDO2, those FIDO2 tokens. I have, some of these ones that I use. I personally am a very big fan of these token 2 tokens. I think the price point on them is great. I really like using them. They come in different form factors, so you can, if you want to put a credit card thingy in your wallet, that's great. This is not an ad for token 2, by the way. We can mention the YubiKeys and all the other ones as well.
It was not sponsored by.
Not sponsored by token 2.
But what's great with conditional access, Chris, focusing on the roles, is much better than focusing on groups, right? Because we all know how it goes. People are added into groups, removed from groups, and now that you're scoping on a role, you know that you cover all of the admins all of the time, right?
100%. That's it. And it's from that perspective, then it doesn't matter if someone's trying to slip themselves into an elevated role or what have you. Whatever happens, you're now forcing that phish resistant MFA on the admin roles, right? So I love it. You're probably going to have to exclude the directory sync role if you're running Entra ID Connect. Otherwise, your Entra ID Connect will not sync because it's also going to be expected to MFA. But that's something that you want to deal with. So back to those fish resistant MFAs. So we mentioned FIDO. Anything that's PKI based as well, I think is pretty good, right? And I think, Koos, you're going to talk about Passkeys and stuff in a second, but that's kind of where you want to be going. Passkeys, Windows Hello for Business falls into, I think, that category as well. Those types of sort of hardened fish resistant MFA methods, right? So I think that really is what you do. Now you may be asking, okay, 2 policies. This is interesting. I've heard folks talk about many baseline conditional access policies. You'll get different opinions from different folks in the industry, and they may be they're perfectly valid opinions. Every environment is different, so you may need more policies. I like the 2 policy approach because it's a really easy baseline to configure. It also aligns very well with the CIS benchmarks. So I use the CIS benchmarks a lot when I do assessments of customer environments, and CIS 4.0, 2 policies. That's kind of their recommendation with fish resistant MFA on the admin roles. So you'd be getting yourself CIS compliant if you did that straight away. So.
And I'm happy to see that Microsoft is now also starting enforcing their customers to apply MFA, right? Starting with the Azure portal, and more stuff is on its way. Because I still see companies excluding just too many users or entire groups with lots of users, like you said before, because they just think it's a hassle to onboard the MFA if it's an authenticator app or SMS or whatever. They don't want to put that burden on their users, and they just exclude those users. And soon you cannot. Well, I'm not sure what the deadline is, or already passed, or later this month. I don't know the exact date, but soon you won't be able to exclude that any longer.
That's right. I mean, that Secure Future initiative is coming for you, right? So better be prepared with it. And I think that you bring up a very good point, because when it comes to exclusions, what about those break glass emergency accounts, right? We've been saying for years, you need 2 break glass accounts. You need to make sure that they have strong passwords, that the passwords are stored in a safe, that type of thing. But we've also been saying for years that those accounts should be excluded from MFA. Well, that's no longer the case, right? We're at a place now where even your break glass accounts need to have MFA. Obviously, you don't want to have MFA registered on one person's device in that instance, because if Johnny or Jane are on a beach in Aruba and that MFA is needed, that's never a good place. So this is one of those things again where FIDO 2 tokens makes perfect sense, because you can keep the token in the safe as well. You want to think about your processes around all of this, right? Don't just set and forget that you got a process there of managing those accounts, the passwords, testing the logins occasionally. You also want to then obviously be testing those tokens, making sure that stuff works, that there's a well understood procedure and process for how do we actually use these things? How do we invoke this and use these accounts? So all of those things need to be documented and sort of thought about as a process, right? Really, really important. So,
so regarding the break the glass, Chris, I actually recently discovered a feature in a password vault from Keeper. We use Keeper at the company as a business solution for a lot of our passwords. And I actually discovered that Keeper provides a way to provide a OTP-based MFA method inside Keeper. And the great thing about that is if you share those credentials with other people which should have access to the break the glass account, they can actually pull out the OTP from Keeper, put it in the login. To be honest, technically, it's not the most secure and best solution, because you still have dependency on the Entra ID MFA service. So people at Microsoft will tell you that the FIDO 2 key is even better, and I would agree with that. But like you said, the FIDO 2 key is living in a safe. Now you should also think about a process. How can we enter that safe? Who has the key to that safe, right?
Exactly right. Yeah.
A whole bunch of challenges might arise. And that's why I do think that although it might not be on the top of the list regarding the securest way, I think, it's secure, but because it has a different additional dependency. there might be an issue with Microsoft services while causing the OTP MFA not to work. But I still think it's much better than
right.
SMS or Authenticator from the CEO on the beach, right?
That's right. And I think that's a really good point, right? Because again, just small gains here, small things that you do add up over time, right? So, don't let perfect be the enemy of good with this, right? If your break glass accounts are there and they're excluded, well, the next really good step could be something like that. I know Bitwarden does the same thing. You can have, in Password Vault OTP as well. There are other solutions as well that you can kind of look at, but think about these things, and the important thing is to revisit these things, right? If you're going to do this today, well, next year or in the next 6 months, whenever you're kind of re-looking at all of your security again, look at these things and see if there's a better solution or if there's a better option available for you. So
yeah, I hear the argument a lot of times as well at customers that they don't want to enforce an authenticator app, for example, on mobile phones because they're privately owned devices, and some employees don't want to mess with business apps on their privately owned devices, right? I think it might be not a popular opinion, but then go for SMS MFA. It's even better than no MFA, and especially where phone companies make it harder to copy SIM cards nowadays. I think, well, of course, it's still a risk, and other MFA is better, but it's better than nothing.
Again, 100%, and these are the types of things that I think we come up with, right? Is real world example is I was working with a customer not too long ago, and this exact thing came up. This customer, most of their users belong to it's a US-based customer. Most of their users belong to a union, and as part of the union, they do not allow the use of personal devices for work activities. Right? Their stance on this is very much that if it's going to be used for work has to provide it. For the company or for the organization, very large expense to providing phones for everyone, right? But you can provide these things to people for relatively it's relatively affordable compared to providing someone a new iPhone every few years. And you're right, this happens. I think in Europe where you are, it's quite common, right, to either be provided a work phone or not be expected to use it at all. I know I worked for a Swiss company before, and it was the same thing. Like the company just said, you will use our phone. It's secured by our policy, and if you want to access anything outside of the office, this is what you use. So I think it's I
think that's one of the reasons why the iPhone SE is doing so well in Europe as well.
Right, they still make that thing.
It's the most affordable iPhone, and it has a very long support period, right? So that's probably the choice that most companies are making.
Fair enough. I mean, look, if you're really just using it for Teams, email, and Authenticator, there's probably not. You probably don't need a great hunting phone.
Of course.
So, so look, I think to summarize and some takeaways here, and obviously, folks, we're going to put all of this information in. We'll link this to the blog, to our blog, and we'll be able to kind of read all this information. So don't worry if you haven't summarized all of this while we've been talking. But some takeaways here that I kind of wanted to leave you with here is if you don't already have MFA deployed, I think it's really, really important to start somewhere, right? If you have a particular use case, a particular group of users or whatever that can't, there's no immediate solution for, that's okay. Work on that in the background, but continue to deploy your MFA across the org to other folks. I think it's really, really important that your admin accounts are very well secured. Look at that phish-resistant MFA. And then, make sure you limit exclusions, right? I think it's far too easy, where in environments where, especially where you have a lot of admins, it becomes very, very easy for folks to just start excluding from policy, right? It's not a good place to be, unless you absolutely have to. So not all or nothing, and it's really not all set. It's not set and forget. This is something that you want to, as with all your security configurations and processes. And we're going to talk a little bit later in the episode when we look at our community tool spotlight. We'll talk about some tooling to kind of help you with some of the sort of continuous improvement stuff. But MFA, it's not going anywhere, I don't think. But Koos, why don't you tell us about Passkeys and kind of what you've been up to in that space?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. MFA is actually it should be a no-brainer, especially when you see that the password attacks are still the most popular attacks and main reasons why adversaries are entering your company's organization, the company's network. But although the password attacks were or are still the most popular attack vector, we also see a rise in phishing for MFA. So-called adversary in the middle attacks, where an adversary is in the middle between you and the authentication, and they actually are able to phish your session token. So you think you're authenticating to the portal, to your application, but you're actually sending out the authentication key to the adversary, which can steal your token. And as long as the token is valid, they can authenticate as you and probably register an additional MFA method, for example, so that they have some kind of persistence and can keep coming back.
Those are really scary. Like I've seen some of the tooling that they use for that. It's I mean, you'd be able to convince most folks to do that.
And I also want to encourage people to start messing with those tools as well. One of the most popular ones is Evil Genix, probably well known in the community. It's an open source tool you can run as a proxy between and simulate this kind of attacks, where the user sees a MicrosoftOnline.com URL, but the O is a 0 or something like that, with a slight change. They'll probably won't notice that. All kinds of impressive demos with that, and indeed, it makes you think. The next time you connect to a Starbucks Wi-Fi, is it really the Starbucks Wi-Fi, or am I connecting to hotspot in somebody's backpack? Right?
Well, don't ever connect to the Starbucks Wi-Fi. That's the easier solution there. But no, I hear what you're saying, and I think it's an interesting concept, because these tools exist. And if you bury your head in the sand and ignore them, it doesn't mean they're going to go away, right? And I think Merrill Fernando from Microsoft sort of posted on LinkedIn or X the other day, and he was wrestling with the issue, right? Is how much information do you provide folks? Because when you provide them enough information, they can either choose to use that information as in a good way as a defender to protect their environment, or that same information can also be weaponized and used in a bad way, right? And I think it's one of those things, is if you just ignore it, it's not going to go away. So I think it's really good to be talking about the tools that are being used, getting folks across that stuff and familiar with it, so they know how to defend against it.
Yeah, and again, I still stand by my earlier remark. If your only MFA option right now, due to all kinds of policies you have in a company, is SMS MFA, it's even better than none. But I would strongly encourage looking into the Passkeys as an MFA method, or if you're already using MFA with your Authenticator app, look into Passkeys as well. So Passkeys is a pair of cryptography keys, right? Like you mentioned earlier, as a PKI-based authentication, where the private key is protected on the device by a PIN or a biometric authentication with a fingerprint or something like that. And passkeys you can use as a passwordless login as well. And you're probably seen a lot of sites popping up lately providing you the option to register a passkey. GitHub, Google
is
I don't know.
Annoyingly good at that. Like it pops up all the time, and if you're not paying attention, you just generate a passkey. And the other day I had a look, and I had all these passkeys, and I'm like, I don't even remember where I generated these things. So they're annoyingly good at pushing that out.
Yeah, and especially when you're using a password vault, if you're either using Apple's own iCloud keychain or something, or 1Password or LastPass or Keeper or whatever, you can store those passkeys in your password vault, and you don't even need to know a password to authenticate to that website, right? So there are actually two types of passkeys. So these are the cloud syncable passkeys we're talking about, but Microsoft is currently not providing those types of passkeys just yet. They might in the future, I don't know. So currently they only offer device bound passkeys, and which means that the passkey is bound to a physical device, either a FIDO2 key, which is also a passkey. You held them up in front of the camera earlier. We're familiar with those, but recently Microsoft also provided you the option to register a device-bound passkey inside their authenticator app on your phone, which essentially makes your phone a FIDO2 key, if you will, so to speak. And the way that works, you scan a QR code from your screen with the authenticator app, and then you authenticate. And I was like, this kind of peculiar, right? Why is this phishing resistant? How can an attacker not generate a QR code which I need to scan? But the problem is, the solution there lies in the fact that the device you're authenticating with needs to be in a close by proximity of the actual authentication. And that's also why Bluetooth is used on your smartphone, for example, or with a FIDO key, you physically bring it to the computer, right, and stick it in. And that's why Bluetooth is also required on the device. And although it is the safest method of MFA right now, Passkeys, it also comes with a couple of limitations, of course, because that makes sure that we won't run out of work, Chris.
Well, I was just going to ask you, how ready for prime time is this, right? Because, in just to take a second here, I think, we talked earlier about MFA and deploying the Authenticator app. Well, if you've already done the work to deploy the Authenticator app to your end users and they are already using it, that makes it a little bit easier for them to then adopt something like Passkeys, right? So again, there's that sort of maturity that can be done.
Yeah, I have to put a caveat here, is that it's still in preview, the Passkeys through Authenticator app. So that might already be a reason companies will probably stay away from it until it becomes GA. But there is now a seamless onboarding method from the Authenticator apps for like you said, it's very easy to onboard. But still, there are a couple of challenges there. And I would say a FIDO key, a physical keys is already more maybe perhaps a proven technology. Again, I mentioned the Bluetooth requirement on the Authenticator app, which can be a problem in companies where they want to restrict Bluetooth connections, for example, from your laptop. And Microsoft has written interesting guides for that. And we will link them to the show notes, of course, where they help you restrict Bluetooth, but allow the Authenticator app smartphone connection, for example, through an Intune policy deployment, for example. But when I was at the company I worked for, we were actually enforcing the phishing resistant MFA strength. That's what Microsoft calls it inside the conditional access. And we actually ran into a completely different issue, and I wanted to highlight that as well today. We had external contractors logging on a Azure Virtual Desktop environment, and the Azure Virtual Desktop environment is a trusted environment. Those devices are compliant. And thus, from there, they can authenticate into all the company apps. And with conditional access, we check device compliance, we check risk status, all those kind of things. But the thing is, when those external contractors were using a Mac and they were using the remote desktop connection client by Microsoft to connect into the Azure Virtual Desktop environment, that client does not support WebAuthn. And that's actually the name of the protocol used to do passkey authentication, which makes it impossible to do a seamless phishing-resistant MFA connection on the remote virtual desktop machine with a FIDO key stuck into the local MacBook, for example.
Interesting.
Yeah,
that is a challenge. Yeah.
That is. And of course, Microsoft will tell you, well, you can onboard the Mac and use, how do you call it, a system level, a single sign-on or something like that with Intune. Of course, you can do that. And then you can use the FIDO key locally on the machine. That's no problem for a Mac as well. But if you are relying on a remote desktop connection in between, you're kind of screwed, actually.
Interesting. And if obviously in a contractor scenario, that's why you would have that, right? Is you have contractors bringing their own devices and you want to put them on the remote desktop because
so this is still a major downside. And I also noticed that even Windows users using the remote desktop connection app from the Windows store which is funnily enough exactly the same as the MSI you download and install. It looks the same, has the same icon, but the Windows Store version also does not come with WebAuth and redirection abilities. And this probably has something to do with the fact that those Windows Store apps run in a kind of containerized sandbox-like process on the machine, and that's why they cannot reach out to the USB port or the Bluetooth connection to process that.
Okay.
So
well, that's interesting. Wow.
Yeah. So if you're running into those issues with Windows, make sure to download the MSI version of the remote desktop connection. And for Mac, I'm really hoping Microsoft is able to figure out an updated connection for Mac users as well, because this customer actually had to hand out Windows laptops now to those external contractors to make sure that they're able to authenticate to their resources remotely.
Wow. Yeah, and look, there's nothing worse than telling a Mac guy that he has to use Windows.
I know how it feels.
Sacrilege, because that's happened to me before. No. So I understand.
But I was also like, it's 2024, right? Are we still having the Windows versus Mac discussion from the 90s?
That's right.
Well, apparently we do.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
And another thing I also noticed, I was actually, I'm a big fan of 1Password. Although I am stuck into the Apple ecosystem with a lot of my devices and photos and everything, I tend to like the idea that my passwords and everything are still in a third-party company, right? In this case, I've chosen for 1Password. But the thing is with iOS, when you use 1Password to automatically fill in the passwords for you and the passkeys, for example, and you want to enroll the passkey on the Microsoft Authenticator app, you have to make the Authenticator app the primary application to fill in the passwords for you, because otherwise Authenticator app will not pop up being able for you to complete the authentication request. Luckily, iOS 18 solves this issue, and I know it's already out now for a couple of weeks, but when I was struggling with these issues, iOS 18 was still in beta, and iOS 18 now allows you to select multiple password providers, and I believe this wasn't an issue on Android devices. So also keep in mind, if you're running into this issue, update to iOS 18.
Interesting. That's good info. I think that being able to use multiple password managers and all that, I think it's important. And I think the adoption of passkeys, I think, is only going to continue to grow once we can actually properly sync them. Because I think the FIDO Alliance is actually, they're working on actually allowing it as part of the actual the standard, right? To allow the syncability and make it a little bit more open for everyone to be able to sync these things. So that's good to know. I use, like you, most of my stuff is Apple too. I use Bitwarden as my password manager. I also like to have that third party thing that's just outside, right? Just keeps things kind of nicer and more cleaner, I guess, from that perspective.
Yeah.
So very, very nice. Any closing thoughts on passkeys here?
Well, I think I already gave that away, I guess. I think it is, especially FIDO2 keys is the way to go, in my opinion. But again, if you want to stick with SMS for now, do that instead of don't enabling it at all. But also be aware of some potential downsides with the FIDO2 keys. You have to hand them out. Also, a thing you have to remember, if you really want to enforce phishing resistance MFA on all users, you also have to think about an additional step when you onboard new users. Because if you have a new user and he or she authenticates for the first time to your environment, normally you would receive a pop-up asking you to register your authenticator, right, as an MFA method. For FIDO2 keys, passkeys, that is unfortunately not yet possible. And since you are forcing the conditional access policy to require an MFA method with a phishing-resistant strength, you cannot register. So you have a chicken and an egg problem, so to speak.
That's right. Yeah.
So the way you can work around this is by registering a temporary access pass with a new user for the first time, and it can be a one-time valid, for example. they authenticate with the temporary access pass, and then they register the FIDO2 key, and that will be the authentication method for all future authentications. But also take a look at EvilGenX and how scary and easy it is for adversaries to phish your session tokens. And I think this should really be on your list of to-dos.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think that's great. We'll have that in the show notes, so we can definitely kind of refer to that. One of the things we want to do with the show, as part of providing this information to folks, I think, is we want to sort of highlight a lot of the really good work that's coming out of the community, right? And there's a lot of work being done by sort of MVPs and just folks in the broader Microsoft and security communities to kind of help everyone get more secure. One of the things I think for this week that we wanted to talk about, or the thing for this week that we want to talk about, is a project called Meister. Now, if you are into Entra ID at all, then you probably follow Merrill Fernando on the socials, and you'll know that he is not an AI bot, but in fact, very, very smart fellow that works for Microsoft. He's actually based here in Melbourne, in Australia. Now, part of a project that Merrill's been involved in, and he's not the only one. He seems to be the face of the project, but I know there's Fabian and a bunch of other guys that are folks that are involved in this project is called Meister. And what it is it's essentially an easy button for being able to run continuous testing on your M365 environment, right? So it's a PowerShell module that allows you to do to run a bunch of tests against your environment and basically see the output and outcome of those tests. And you can run those tests as a one-off to see, draw a line in the sand and see where you are. Or if you really, want to take your your SecOps to the next level, if you will, right, and look for things like configuration drift and all of that, you might run this on a continual basis occasionally every now and then, just to see if there has been any config drift in your environment and sort of look at how you could improve it. So I wanted to bring that up today. If you haven't come across it, well, firstly, you got to go follow Merrill at Merrill. Merrill has great content, but also Merrill posts about the Meister and the Meister project a lot. There are a ton of other MVPs associated with that. And, sorry, guys, I don't have everyone's names to hand, so I'm not trying to discredit you in any way or not give you the credit where it's due. I know this has been a really big community project. But, out of the box, there are a bunch of tests already available. So, so the Scuba framework, which is the American CISA agency, has sort of provided that. There's a bunch of community-built tests for Entra and conditional access and things like that. I think 36 or 37 tests already just out of the box. And because it's built on Pesta, the Pesta test framework, you can actually go and actually create your own tests, write your own tests. So, if you're a consultant and you like I am, and you work with customers, and there's particular things that you want to check for, you can build those tests yourself. Or if you're, you work internal to an organization and your environment has some quirks, and you want to build some special tests to look for things like that, you can do that too. So great project. Like I said, easy button for continuous testing in your environment. Called Meister. Meister.dev is the website. We will have this information and a link to a sort of intro YouTube video in the show notes for you to take a look at.
Yeah, really great effort.
Yeah. That brings us to the end of the show. Man, time flies when you're having fun, right? Or talking about security. Interesting few weeks coming up. We've got Ignite. Ignite coming up here in next week actually. So I'm not sure when we'll publish this. Probably will be after Ignite, but we have Ignite coming up. So in future episodes, there may be some information about what happened at Ignite and some important takeaways from Ignite.
Definitely.
So be sure to look out for that. Koos, what do you got? Anything interesting coming up here in the next couple of weeks?
Well, actually, I have a visit to Stockholm coming up. I'm actually going to ESPC in Stockholm, and I was asked to speak there about building your security data lake with Sentinel and Azure Data Explorer. So I'm really looking forward to that one.
Yeah, very nice. We'll definitely share that talk and content once it's all done and dusted as well. So that's some really good info.
Summarize it a bit in a future episode.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you, folks, for listening. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. You can also catch us if you like video and you like to look at us when we're talking to you. You can catch us on the Cloud Architects YouTube channel. All of the information available in the show notes and associated blog posts. If you have any tips suggestions, things that you want to see, things that you're fighting with, grappling with in your environment, or things that you're just not sure about, reach out to us and we'll see what we can do to build an episode around it or to kind of get you that info. But until next time, thank you very much for listening, and it's Goose and Goose signing off.
See you next time. Bye-bye.